Hello, how are you? Sziasztok, hogy vagytok? Jól? Any of my Romanian folks here? Bună ziua! All right, hello. Hi, everyone from all of the 26 countries. Thank you so much for coming. What a great event, as every year. Yeah, that's me, and if you haven't been here for the last 6 years, I have. So I'm not going to introduce myself too much, because I usually, you already know probably that we're going to talk about Selenium. So I'm doing automation in my day-to-day work. I'm a QA manager. I like to garden. I travel. I do so many things. And ever since last October, I'm also doing something interesting in my spare time, which is also volunteering for the Selenium project. So what's really helpful in that aspect is that I know a lot of things that are going on in the project, and I'm really excited to share some of the things that have been released in recent years, or actually since Selenium 4 in the library. But I'm also happy to talk about other things that are going on in the project. So having said that, next year, by the way, is Selenium's 20-year anniversary, which means it's not an old framework. It just was created a long time ago, and we are at a point where we have so many awesome features in the library. There's so much going on in the project. We're planning some cool stuff for next year, so stay tuned and follow us on social media to see what it's about. And speaking of which, if you follow us on social media, you will have access to the announcements regarding our releases. So whenever a new release happens in the library, we post about it. We also provide you links to our blog, where you can find out more about what's being released. So you can find some descriptions, like you can see what are the features. And you can also check out, or you should check out, the change logs for each of the bindings that we are releasing. Binding means programming language, so that you can be up to date with what is going on in the framework, and you can better understand what are the features that are being released. As I mentioned, we are supporting multiple programming languages, so I think we have 5 or 6 that we are supporting. And generally, when a release happens, what we try to do is to release the same feature across all of the platforms, across all of the programming languages. I'm talking about features, right? Because we have a lot of bug fixes that go into each release, and those bug fixes are obviously specific to a programming language. In many cases, you don't have the same bug on all of the programming languages, and this is where it's useful for you to look through the changelog to understand, for the language that you're using, what bug fixes have occurred, and also what new features are coming in, because we do have large features that are being released and also smaller ones. Usually the larger ones are released, let's say, in chunks. So we don't wait for an entire year for a large feature to be developed and then pushed into, let's say, production, which means to reach their way to you. We will roll out the feature, like chunks of it, based on some functionality that they offer. This is the case, for example, for the WebDriver Manager that I'm going to discuss, and also the BiDi spec. Apart from that, whenever we're doing a release, we also do some cleanup, because there's a lot of legacy code in the project that needs to be removed, because the project is moving to more, let's say, more modern architecture, and we're doing more up-to-date things, let's say. And of course, yeah, so these are basically the things we are releasing with every release. And one of the things which is also here is latest browser support. So because you have the capability to use Selenium to work with the DevTools corresponding to each language, we need to be able to keep up with the changes done by the browser vendors in terms of those DevTools or DevTool tools, what I mean. So that's why whenever we are doing a new release, we also need to support, for example, Chrome DevTools, CDP. So if you're looking in the changelogs, you will see which versions are supported with each of these releases. How about how you can contribute? So as you probably already know, Selenium is an open source project which is developed by volunteers. So there's a handful of people who are actively writing the code in this library, and we can always welcome help. So in case, let's say, you have a bug that really annoys you and that you know the fix for, what you can do is create a PR for it, and we'll accept it for you if you properly wrote it right. So if you're actually fixing the bug, we can accept your PR, and that's how you become a committer and welcome to the Selenium project, right? So we're actively looking for people to help out with developing the features in the framework. But if it's something you cannot do and you have a bug that you would like to get fixed as soon as possible, what you should do is provide as much and as clear information you can when raising a new defect or contributing with more information if the defect has already been created, so that when a developer is looking at the defect, they have they have as much information as they need to start implementing the fix for your bug. There have been a lot of bugs that were created where the thread is just endless because there's just too little information and developers don't know where to pick it up from. So when you have something like that, provide logs, provide as much explanation as you can, and it really, really helps to get things done and get them released faster. How many of you are still using Selenium 3? Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed. You're not the only ones, because a while ago, I kind of ran a certain poll in LinkedIn and in Twitter to see, out of the respondents, how many people are still using Selenium 3. And I was a little bit shocked that around 30%, let's say, out of the people who responded to the poll were still using Selenium 3 in 2023. And Selenium 4 was released in 2021, I think in October or November, so the first version was then. So that's like 2 years ago. And I think I just want to encourage you and tell you that it's time to migrate to Selenium 4, because there's so many cool stuff going on, and we keep adding more and more amazing features to the library. And I've actually done this switch from Selenium 3 to 4 on a project a few weeks ago, and I can tell you that it wasn't that much of a big deal. So it was just a few hours of actually implementing the changes, and then obviously I had to run the sanity to make sure that everything was working fine. But the changes you need to make in order to migrate from one are not that crucial, not that difficult to do. Plus, we do have documentation for it. So you can easily take a look at the guide to see what you need to change, and off you go. You have access to the latest offerings from our library. So I highly encourage you to migrate to the latest version, which is, by the way, since last week, 4.13. And because I'm mentioning 4.13, I also want to mention that that will be the last version of Selenium that supports Java 8 as the minimum required version. Why? Because, as you might already know, in September, Java kind of pulled the plug on support for Java 8. So then, every library that is using Java kind of needs to migrate to at least Java 11 to be, kind of consistent and to still get the goodness of Java. So, now looking at some of the features that have been implemented in the last years, I'm not going to talk about all of them because there's quite a lot of them and I only have some minutes left, right? So I will go through them. I'm not going to explain all of them because I have a lot of links on these slides, and I will also, the conference will provide the slides afterwards. So I would recommend that if you see something that sounds interesting to you, go ahead, take a look at the documentation and see how you can use these features in your own project. I'm going to randomly pick them and go in no particular order, and I'm going to start with the Chrome headless. A few months ago, Chrome, the actual browser, released their true authentic headless mode, because up to that point they had kind of a headless mode, but it wasn't really pure headless. So then in Selenium there was in Java at least, I'm going to discuss Java today because I'm using Java, but as I said, features are kind of consistent across all of the bindings, right? So in Java we had this convenience method for setting the headless. You had to just create a Chrome options and then use the set headless true mode. Now that's gone, and the new way of setting the headless mode is just as you would for Firefox or other browsers by using the options.add_arguments method. So this is just a very small change. And to see why you need to add headless equals new, that you can find in the official Chrome documentation where they explain everything about headless. We now have an improved Actions API where for Chromium browsers, Chrome, Edge, Opera, and so on, you have more options to scroll on your page. So you have the option to scroll. Yeah, my clicker is not working. So scroll to an element. which you provide the web element, and then you can just scroll directly to it. You can scroll by a certain amount, which means you can scroll up, down, left, right, by providing the number of pixels by which you want to scroll. You have the option to scroll from a particular element, which you will define as an origin, and you can scroll to it by specifying how much you want to scroll. For example, once you know which is your origin, you can scroll to the left, to the right, up and down, depending on how you need to do that. You can also scroll considering your viewport. So you can set your origin to be a certain point on the viewport, and you can then scroll from that original point again with a number of pixels. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of scrolling on the page if you need to do that in your testing using the latest Selenium versions. Previously, we had the option to maximize a window, but now, in case you need to, you can also minimize the window, and you can also go full screen. So full screen is usually useful when the screen size just doesn't fit what you're trying to test, and you need more of your product, and you need to kind of get rid of some things that are not needed on the screen. So full screen is your friend now, and these are really easy to use. Driver.manage.window, as you would do with maximize, you now need to specify either minimize or full screen. So this is an interesting feature. Until now, you had the option to work with multiple windows that were already opened by the test in a certain way. For example, by clicking on a button, if you had a new window, you could just switch to it and interact with it. However, now you also have the option to open a blank tab or window. So from the test, with your session already open, and if you are already doing something, you can just separately open a new tab or window using the switch to new window commands, and do whatever you need in that new tab. And once you're done with it, just close it and go back to your initial screens and continue running the test as you were previously doing. Shadow DOM. I don't know if everybody is using Shadow DOM. This is a more it's kind of an iframe, but it's not an iframe. So shadow, you can think of elements in a shadow DOM as not being visible to the outside, and for the outside, not seeing what's in the shadow DOM. It's kind of like a box where things are being hidden, right? So previously, if you wanted to work with Shadow DOM, you would need to use JavaScript and run some JavaScript code in order to be able to go inside the DOM and get the elements from there and work with the elements. Now you can do it out of the box with Selenium by first providing, I still don't have the clicker, by first providing which is the element that represents the Shadow DOM, and then looking for the root of the DOM, because the Shadow DOM is kind of like a tree. It has a root node. And once you've identified the root node, you can search throughout all the children, and that is how that is the way you kind of switch to inside the Shadow DOM, and you have access to all of the elements that are there, and you can interact with them just as you would with any other regular web element. You can now take screenshots of particular elements, so you don't need to take screenshots of the entire viewport. You can just specify which is the element you want to take a screenshot of, and these are just two examples. I have two drop-downs here that I just took a very simple image of. And specifically to Firefox, you can now also take the full screen or the full page screenshot. Full page means if you would normally have to scroll to get to the bottom of the page, this screenshot covers that. So you will see the entire scrolled page by taking a screenshot using a Firefox driver. So this is very important. This does not apply to WebDriver or to a driver that was cast to WebDriver. You need to specifically use Firefox driver in order to have access to this functionality. Relative locators, I think these were one of the things that were kind of talked about when Selenium 4 was released, namely that you now have the ability to define elements on a page relatively in position to another element on the page that you know of. For example, in my case, with green in the middle, I have an input. And once I know the input, I can choose to find an element to the left, to the right, upwards and downwards from that element by using this relative locator code. So I just need to specify who is the origin and where from that origin I want to look for, and of course what selector I'm looking for. So it doesn't need, you don't need to have a unique selector for that element. You can just find a selector that defines your element and then just look, from another element you can properly identify, right? Look for the new element to the left or to the right and upwards and downwards. And just be aware that this is dependent on how your window looks. So if you're resizing the screen, you might not necessarily find the element you expect it to be on the right-hand side, let's say, on the right-hand side, because maybe by resizing it just switched places somewhere on the page. So keep that in mind. Selenium Manager. So this was a feature that was really requested because previously, when you wanted to run your tests on a certain browser and on a certain platform, you would have to download driver files specific to the browser and to the platform. And whenever a new version of the browser would be released, the same driver might not work with the new release, with the new browser release. And it kind of made management a bit difficult. So there was this guy who created a separate library to do just that, to do the management for you so that you wouldn't have to download any driver file, you wouldn't have to set the path to that driver file, and so on and so on. And that guy now works inside the Selenium project and is implementing that same library inside the Selenium project. So currently, if you're using the latest version of Selenium, remove all of your driver files, don't set any path, and the manager will automatically download for you the driver version which suits the version of the browser that you are working with. This is what you currently have, and what is currently in the works is automatically downloading a browser as well. So this is a feature that, as I said, is rolled out gradually. Currently, I think we're supporting Firefox and Chrome, but I don't want to say any stupid things. But there is some work that's already been released, and we already support that. So for more information about what we are working on here and what's going to be the end product, you can take a look at the link I have here, where all the tasks are. This is basically kind of like a Jira board, where you can see what are the features that will be implemented as part of this, let's say, mini project. The BiDi spec. So as I've said, you have Chrome DevTools, for example. Chrome DevTools allows you to interact with the browser by basically working with Chrome DevTools and then issuing some comments from there and reading some information from the page. Currently, all of the browser vendors are working on the so-called BiDi spec, which will be a universal language, let's say, or a universal API that Selenium can access in order to access the functionality of the browser and also to access, let's say, the DevTools. So this is kind of a longer story, and I don't have that much time for it, but I do recommend you go through these links where you can find more about what that spec actually means, what it means for Selenium, what we currently support, and what is the future of this project. It's going to make available much more functionality for your test. You will have access to much more information and to more ways of interacting with what is happening in the browser. So this is kind of like the future of doing automation. While the BiDi protocol is in work, so until all of the browser vendors are done with their part, there's also a CDP, Chrome DevTools protocol implementation, available in Selenium that you can use. So as I said, check out the links to see what kind of interactions you can currently do from your Selenium test with the Chrome DevTools tool inside the browser. HTTP client. HTTP client is used within Selenium for different things, like communicating with the grid and issuing some comments with the browser. The problem is that the library used in Selenium right now hasn't been worked on for a few years, and it's still at Java 8. And because we are migrating to Java 11 soon, a separate HTTP client was created. It's the Selenium HTTP client. And you should import this separately into your project in order to migrate, for example, if you want to Java 11. And because you will have to basically when we are switching to Java 11. Because, as I said, some of the core functionality that the HTTP client is doing currently is implemented in this new small library. Virtual authenticator is useful if you have tests where you're supposed to log in with a token. So when you don't need to log in with a password, but for example, you would have one of those small code generating devices. If you need to automate such functionality in your project, you can use the virtual authenticator for that. It works out of the box. And there are very good examples on the links that I sent you, or I wrote here. A very small feature, but it's very impactful, is that previously, if you had an invalid selector, so you created a web element with an invalid selector, and you would use a wait with it, you would have to wait until the wait executes to find out that the reason for your test failure was that the selector was invalid. Because of this small change, this is now a compile time error. So if you provided an invalid selector, for example, you marked it as a CSS selector, but it was an XPath, you will immediately see the error and will not have to wait for 30 seconds to see what is going on, and you can fix it right away. So I think this is very useful. The new grid. So in Selenium 4, there is a completely rewritten from scratch grid. Grid, as you know, is used for running tests on multiple browsers at the same time, in parallel. There's been a lot of good work going on here. As I said, I'm going to leave you with the links to do more research, but basically it's more effective, more efficient, and there's a lot of capabilities for you to configure the grid to run your tests, so do check this out. We've also implemented observability, so you can see exactly what is going on within the grid. So you have more information regarding the communication between the nodes and what kind of information is being sent, and you can debug easier in case you have some failure that previously you wouldn't have more clues about. You can now also test in the beta and the dev channels for the browsers, so you don't necessarily have to wait until a browser is released to test your functionality by running tests in the grid. You can now use the dev and beta channels as soon as they are available from the browser vendors. And there's plenty other stuff going on. There's currently discussions about what we are going to do for next year and in the future. And there's discussions about, what Java 5 is going to look like, what Java 6 is going to look like. We always welcome feedback from the community to understand what the community wants from the library, how the community is using the library. So if you want to share more information with us, or if you're curious about how things are happening in the project, don't forget to check out selenium.dev, where we have our official documentation and where you can find the way to access our Slack channels. So you can come on to Slack and have a chat with any of the people on the project and with everybody else who is using the channel to gain more information and to learn about Selenium. So that's it in a nutshell. There would be plenty more to talk about, but yeah, I have a few seconds for questions, so let's go through that.
That's more than a few, but big applause at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Hagam Selenium race with new technologies like Playwright, for example, against Outwaits, which is provided by Playwright.
I think it's a misconception that all the libraries should work the same. So Playwright, Cypress, and Selenium are completely different. The engines, the core of these libraries are completely different. So we don't offer auto-weights out of the box because we offer a core functionality that people can then customize to suit their needs. We don't know of all the cases when there would be the need for a weight, because all of the applications that you are testing are so different. There are so many things we are not aware of, right, in the way you have your project set up. So what I can recommend is, not that I want to advertise myself, but I do talk a lot about how to use weights in your testing. Using WebDriver weights for me was always the key to having the most reliable Selenium tests so that I don't need to use another framework. So if you're interested in the topic, you can check out, I have another presentation from a few years ago from Hustef where I talk about weights, or you can just talk to me about it like on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to guide you to how you can actually write your tests in order to use weights, not auto weights, but your own weights to be successful with your automation.
Okay, won't relative selectors make the test flaky when used on different screen resolutions?
They would, but you need to be aware of this limitation. So, for example, whenever I would create my web elements, I would use @findBy because I'm using lazy loading and so on and so on. And this feature does not work with findBy. So you're kind of bound to using driver find element, and that can lead to some race conditions. But as long as you're aware of the limitations of a functionality and what the functionality actually offers, you don't need to worry that it's going to be flaky. You just need to use the features in such a way that they bring the value that you need them to bring, if I make sense.
I think you do. One more short question answer. What do you think, what will or what should be the next major feature?
I'm not exactly sure what I think it will be, but as I said, we are currently focused on the two major things, which are the BiDi spec, which is going to change so many things and is going to allow so much more automation and getting so much more goodness out of the browsers, and also the Selenium manager for automatic management of the browsers. These are the two key features I know for a fact we are still working on. Regarding the future, I can't really tell you yet, because as I said, we're discussing it, but there's a lot of ideas, and we're waiting for feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Corina.